Welcome. Thank you very much. This is the last installment for this week for Parshat vaYishlach. And we are just finishing up now that episode where Jacob is wrestling with the angel. And we have a few other details to take care of as we bring this to a close. Yesterday we left it with Jacob asking the angel to bless him. Rashi, in looking carefully and deconstructing the actual wording of the passage, explains that it didn't mean to actually bless him, but to acknowledge the blessings that his father, that Isaac had given him. And that's what Jacob was asking, to have those blessings vetted. And the angel actually had said, well, that's going to happen later on at Bethel or Peniel, and Jacob refused to wait until then. And so because he had overcome the angel by wrestling him, the angel was forced to actually acknowledge those blessings right then and there. And that's sort of where we left things. So with that, we're going to make the bracha, and I'm going to start the screen share. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So the blessing, of course, was that Jacob's name was changed from Yaakov, which means to supplant, essentially, which has, of course, extremely negative connotations, to Yisrael, one who wrestles. And we discussed what was the point about the Ale of Yisrael. I do want to summarize that quickly, that it says, Kisarita im Elohim ve'im anashim vatuchal. That it's the angel sort of said that that's the reason you're being given the name Yisrael, one who wrestles with mighty beings, for you have wrestled with Elohim. And interestingly enough, here, right, in the Targum, I didn't explain this yesterday. We just looked briefly. Shira Beth brought this to my attention yesterday in the Targum, but it says Rav Revat, right? Are Rav Ra'at Kodam Hashem, and it says that it doesn't translate Israel, but Rav Ravat is to wrestle, to contend before Hashem, and it uses the word Adonai here, which seems to suggest that Elohim here, it doesn't use Elohim there, right? And as opposed to Guvraya, which means powerful people, right? So understanding what we mean by Elohim. Is Elohim referring to God? Is God capital G? Or is Elohim representing mighty, powerful people? That was left as somewhat ambiguous. I did take a look, interestingly enough, at the Torah Tamima down here. And again, the tradition, as I understood it, even though, of course, the Targum represents a tradition, is that Elohim refers to, sometimes translated as powerful or divine beings. Golda gave us another translation yesterday, which, forgive me, I don't remember at this particular moment. So here we go, at least with this. Amar Rabbah. So this Rabbah was an Amora, a great scholar that is of Talmudic times, following the year 200. Remez lo. Okay. The angel was giving him an allusion, a hint. He was making a suggestion. What was the suggestion? She'atidim shnei sarim latzeit mimenu. That in the future, two princes, right? In other words, two powerful people, leaders, latzeit mimenu, would come from him, would be descended from him. And who are these two leaders? Rosh Golah Shebavalvel, in other words, the exilarch in Babylonia, Venasi Shebe'eretz Yisrael, and the head of the community in the land of Israel. And from this, Mikan, from this, Remez lo Galut, he also was telling him that the Jewish people would go into exile, So there's obviously Torah Tamima's own commentary, and that's important to take a look at. Let's take a look at that. So here we go. This is interesting. Nasi Shebe'eretz Yisrael, mechuneh b'shem Elohim. He says the head of the community in then and this would be the religious head of the community, sort of like the Pope, right? Lahavdil. Mechuneh is also called by the name Elohim. So we use this term Elohim to refer to describe the head of the community of Israel in the land of Israel. Why? Right? Calls for some support, right? Mipnei shesmuchim heim, because they are ordained. So the idea of smuchim comes from the action of laying of hands on the person being ordained, and it is in a way it's like an anointment. It's not an anointment. Anointment is done with oil, but ordination requires the person to place the one who's ordaining, who has been ordained themselves, is required is to place their hands on the head or on the shoulders. I believe it's on the head of the person being ordained, and it imparts a higher level of authority on the person being ordained when you ordain someone. And it has to do with the level of knowledge. In order to become ordained, one had to be and show expertise in various elements of Jewish law. And there was ordination in the land of Israel. There was no ordination. In other words, there were certainly yeshivot and schools in Babylonia, but they did not give ordination at those schools, only in the land of Israel. So
It
that's
reminds me,
yes.
Rabbi, reminds me of Moses giving Joshua,
Yes,
putting your hands
correct,
on
correct, exactly. And it probably goes back to that tradition.
Oh.
Not only that, for al Shem Hakatuv, likewise there is a scriptural verse in Parshat Mishpatim, the parsha that follows Yitro, the giving of the Ten Commandments, and it says regarding a difficult case or a case of dispute, and it uses the term ad ha-Elohim yavo davar shnehem. Okay, and it means, so it says to the Elohim, and there the context clearly refers to judges. So davar shnehem, in other words, their matter of dispute should come before the judges, and those judges are referred to as Elohim. So we have sufficient evidence to understand the word Elohim as not solely meaning God. And in fact, when we use that term Elohim, and you've heard me say this before, and we're now digging a little deeper for you to understand why I'm saying these things, that when we use the term Elohim, we understand God as divine judge. It means that we accept the notion of accountability before heaven. And that's why we talk about Eloheinu, that we are accepting God as our judge. And you know yourselves that people don't have to be respectful of the law. We see examples of it nowadays. So
yeah.
this is a deep and personal element to being a faithful person. So that's why this Elohim, this first Elohim that the angel used, is understood by Rabbah. I think it's Rabbah. Okay, there's another rabbi by the name of Rava, but Rabbah, his name is spelled with an aleph at the end. Rabbah is spelled with a hey at the end. So that's why Rabbah understands that Elohim refers to the head of the community in Israel. Okay. And he says, "Uchedome min halashonot." This is, of course, Torah Mima. He says, and similar examples in the language. And then ve'im anashim, when he says anashim, kinui lerosh gola, it is a synonym for the head of, or an allusion to the head of the exile. And the word is enosh as opposed to Adam. So the word anashim is understood as meaning someone who is of stature. Shahaya Ashir v'karov l'malchut, and the reason why is that he was wealthy and he was close to the king in Babylonia, the king of Babylonia. It could also mean the karov l'malchut, meaning, and this is very close in the sense of not geographically close, but similar to being a king, the amount of power and wealth that that person had. And again, the reason why that is one reason why so much expense is given to government in terms of where they live and the lavishness of when they host, etc. It is a sign of power. V'kan rimes lo galut, and in this way he was alluding to a exile. Ya'an, for the reason ki mekevan sheyu bavel mimela harei ze galut shiglu ma'atzam. Okay, and because he says, since they will be, that is, the Jewish people will be in Babylonia, mimela, automatically, perforce, harei ze galut, that is exile. Shiglu me'atzam, because they would be cast out and exiled from their land. So you can see that that particular sentence about with the Elohim Sarita im Elohim, and Sarita, by the way, okay, let's take a look at it, right? Sarita doesn't necessarily mean to contend with. Okay, so for example, it could also mean you will rule. You will rule. The term for a noble is a sar. A noble person is a sar. So this verb
Rabbi,
sarita can mean, doesn't necessarily just mean, and that's how Rabbah's understanding this as well. Yes, Harlan.
was King Solomon called Elio also? I don't know.
No. I don't believe he's ever referred to in that way. We are talking now about the religious authority. The Nasi of the land of Israel was a religious authority, and certainly it would appear that in those times people took religious authority very, very seriously. And just like for the Catholic Church still takes the Pope very seriously. In fact, even people who aren't Catholic do see him as having authority. They may not necessarily practice sufficiently, but certainly he's understood as having a lot of authority.
Do we have a head rabbi in Israel that's
Very
like
good
that?
question. I think there are. I think there's a chief rabbi. I don't know who it is currently. There is a chief rabbi in Israel of the Sephardic community, and at least in the past, and there was a chief rabbi of the Ashkenazic community. They did have chief rabbis, and of course, at one point in St. Louis, there was a chief rabbi. They no
Yes, there
longer
was.
they
Yeah.
no longer have one. It's not easy. It's not an easy position, let me tell you either. It can. So let's go on now with the text itself and see if we can get to Shlishi then. Vayishal Yaakov. So Jacob then asked, turnabout's fair play. The angel asked him what his name was, and here Jacob is saying, Hagida na, please tell me Shemecha. Please tell me your name. Right there, getting to know each other. So Jacob gave him his name. What's the angel's name? Vayomer, and the angel said, Lama zeti shalishmi. Why? Why are you asking me for my name? Okay. Vayivarech oto sham. And it simply says, so obviously he didn't give him his name, and he blessed him there. And the fact that it says sham, again, there, as opposed to waiting until God would bless him later on. So, excuse me. So this place is called Peniel. There is another place called Bethel, and he gets eventually there. Okay. So let's take a look at the Rashi on this. And that would be right here. It's not a long Rashi. Lama ze tishal. Why are you asking? That's what the angel is saying to him. Bereshit Rabbah, in the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah, Ein lanu shem kavua. This angel was saying, we do not have a fixed name. Mishtanin shmotenu. Our names vary. In other words, we're given different names at different times. So I can't tell you. In other words, why are you asking me since I cannot actually tell you? So he says, and the word hakol is in parentheses. Usually, it can be understood as everything, call everything, but it's not necessary, and that's why it's in the parentheses. Lefi uh, mitzvat avodat hashlichut. So the name we have depends on the actual service we are providing, on the command, right? The command of the work that we are to do. So our name, the name that we have as an angel, is dependent on whatever it is that God sends us to do. And since there are all kinds of things, a myriad of things that God sends angels to perform, their names simply are dependent on what they're doing at the time.
So why couldn't he tell him the current name that related to the current task?
Very good question. Just let me finish the sentence,
Yeah,
Lauren.
yeah.
She'anu mishtalchim, of which we are sent. Just to finish up the Hebrew there. True. And again, possibly it's because had he told him that name, that would have been the one thing that Jacob would have known him as. So it's basically you could understand that the angel was explaining to him that he doesn't have a fixed name. So asking him for his name would assume that he had a fixed name, and it was more important for the angel to tell him that I do not have at least this category of angels, since we do have the idea of Gabriel and Michael and Raphael and Uriel,
Well,
but those are higher up.
I mean, in the text, he actually
Yes.
does not tell Jacob anything. He just says,
No,
why
he
do you
doesn't.
ask?
Right.
And
Correct.
secondly, if he is going to explain that, he could also explain what his current name was. So that, doesn't really.
Well, the reason, no, I hear you. No, and he doesn't. We need Rashi to help us understand what the angel is saying. Okay, remember the context in which this is happening. Does the angel have lots of time to be giving explanations and answering questions? No, he doesn't. So he speaks in this cryptic kind of way by doing something very Jewish, which is
And answering the question with the question.
precisely. You'd think I'd planned this with you, right?
You
Yes.
haven't?
Only over the course of decades, right? So, yes, exactly. I think that's lovely. So we actually have a source now for why we think angels are Jewish. At least some support for that. I think this is actually a good place. I can continue, but this is Shlishi. We just finished here, and I think I'd like to stop here. And with God's help,
Yeah, we
continue
just,
next year. Yeah, just go
Okay.
right there. And I'm going to pop in a bookmark. Let's see, and a bookmark. And there we go. So I'm going to stop the share. And I can continue to record a little bit if you have any other points. We had a discussion yesterday, which I subsequently regretted not having recorded. But does anybody have any thoughts that they would like to have recorded at this point? If that is not the case, yeah, go ahead, Harlan.
I don't understand the situation on the hip situation. Could you explain that a little better to me? Why the Jewish people don't buy the hip?
Yes. So the I'm sorry?
The muscle of the hip.
Yeah,
Why they don't?
right. The sciatic, sometimes it's called the sciatic nerve.
Yeah.
Right. So that actually comes up in a moment because the very next verse talks about Jacob limping on his thigh. So it is a way of, we'll deal with it next year with God's help, but just for the sake of things now, it is a way, well, the way Rashi actually, I believe, explains it, or possibly the Torah Tamima, is that the mitzvah itself is given at Sinai. So it's part of mitzvot of kashrut.
Oh.
Okay.
It's two verses from now. It's the second verse of Shlishi.
Right. Thank you. But regardless, the mitzvah was actually given in Sinai. And the reason why it's mentioned here is so that we have some background as to why this mitzvah was given. So the mitzvah is given as a remembrance. There are mitzvot that are given to us to allow us to remember things. And so, for example, we know that the tzitzit are given to us so that we will remember that we are commanded. and that we will
Yeah.
understand that we are given specific actions that to do and not to do. So it is a reminder of this incident that happened to Jacob. We could also say that it's a remembrance of divine protection, because even though Jacob was injured, he nevertheless overcame the angel. And there may be, I think we discussed this yesterday, there may be some important messages for us to contemplate with regards to that. So at least, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about Elohim.
Yes.
Um, and I may be wrong about this, but it's because of the Aleph and the Elohim and the Lamed. I have associated with the word Ale,
Mm-hmm.
and I also associate with the word Allah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and I always thought that meant powerful. And
It
now I'm
does.
wondering if it's because judges, I guess one of the most powerful things you can do in life is to judge someone.
Indeed.
And that's why really the ultimate judging can only be done by the ultimate power, God.
Right.
But for logistical sake, there has to be a matter of earthly judging, and human beings have to do their best, but you would have to pick somebody wise enough to give them that power to judge someone else.
Right. No, I think there's clearly, we can, and even in our society, and I'd be grateful, and I'm grateful for it, that in American society, judges have a tremendous amount of control and power, but along with that goes an accountability. And again, that's why the Supreme Court, is the ultimate authority in terms of American law. But again, they're supposed to be limited, right? If I understand this correctly, to interpreting whatever specific case comes to them in regards to its constitutionality, that's really what they are empowered to do, is to discuss whether or not it is actually consistent with the American Constitution,
The
and not
Supreme
and not
Court, you
not with
mean?
yes, the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
Correct.
unless they're amending it, the
Yes.
Constitution.
Right, right. But it's not for the judges to amend the Constitution.
No,
Again,
but for them to approve
separation
the
of powers.
amendments.
Yeah,
But I think
yeah,
they would have to approve the amendments
yeah, yeah.
or,
And
interpret them.
well, that's where there's leeway, has to do with interpretation. That's where there's wiggle room. But regardless, I think it's done very intelligently and thoughtfully. But we see people trying to buck that power. I mean, that's the willingness to accept authority, right? That's a
Well, and they tried to
favorite topic.
stack the Supreme Court with,
Right.
political
Correct.
factors, and they do that, both sides do it quite well.
Well,
when they
that's
can.
correct. That's the point. That's why it's not
Yeah.
fair to accuse one side of doing it when both sides
Yeah.
do it,
Oh,
and
I
that's what
didn't
makes
accuse
that's
one
what
side,
makes it
yeah.
fair. That's what makes it fair, is that both have the opportunity. If only one side had that opportunity, and ultimately, of course, that power is vested in the population.
Yeah, well, I don't want to
Yeah, we could
get
get into a
into
whole
why
bunch of
it's
other
not
things.
exactly making
I
it fair,
I
but
agree. No, I can
Yeah,
also
yeah.
I can also understand that. I'm aware of that. All right, so maybe we
I got
should.
another question, one more
Yes,
question.
go ahead, Arlen. You still have a little time.
When
Go
when
ahead.
Jacob buried his wife Rachel,
Yes,
why did he bury her near Bethlehem instead of putting him in the cave where his
yes,
father was? I mean,
yes,
there was room, but and he goes to the cave, and Leah goes to the cave, but
yes.
Rachel doesn't.
Correct.
but is it
Correct.
Why?
because she stole her father's idols?
No, no. Although that's an interesting theory. No, the truth is that that is actually interpreted traditionally as her desire to rid her father's house of idolatry. Okay, but that's the traditional interpretation. No, there's it is very interesting, and of course this doesn't happen until later on in the parsha. But again, Harlan, I appreciate your wanting to anticipate these things. So the distance from Bethlehem to Hebron, where the Machpelah is quite a distance. I don't know how long that journey would take on foot, but again, remember, she died right there as they crossed over the border into Israel, into the land of Israel. And I believe number one, he would want to bury her ASAP, ASAP. But there's also another reason given for this, and that is, and it's a reference, I believe, to Jeremiah, in the prophet Jeremiah, which describes Rachel weeping for her children who are being sent into exile. So that that in fact the reason why Jacob had come from Babylonia back to the land of Israel, that essentially was the route on which people traveled. And so Rachel being there in Bethlehem is understood as being intentional, so that there'd be this cry on the part of one of our matriarchs as to the tragedy of the exile, and in a sense supplicating God to have mercy on us as we moved into exile. And the idea of Kivrat Rachel, Rachel's tomb, being right there on the road, is all part of this understanding of how we interpret the story.
Is
Okay?
it still there?
It is, as far as I know. I
I
believe
could,
it is.
if I go to Israel, I can see that.
Possibly. I mean, it is. It is in. It isn't in the what was originally the state of Israel in 1948. I'm not sure. Sometimes traveling in those areas, how safe it is. I think it just depends. I'm not up on that kind of information. So,
I know the cave is still there because the patriarch, you can go to
yes,
Hebron and see
that's
that.
right. I know. And
But
Well,
Hebron has been a place where there have been tragedies too.
I mean, as far as it's
yeah,
not being a punishment, I just want to just comment that one thing is your interpretation about that she did it to, to help Lavan not worship idols. I've read a lot of different interpretations,
course.
including why they think that one was not a good one. But secondly, Jacob, I mean, she still stole them. And Jacob did things that were treacherous in a sense, and
Yes.
for a good reason maybe, but he got punished for them because
Correct.
what he
Correct.
did was still on some level wrong, and on some level for maybe it was for a greater purpose. And just so even if she did steal the idols for a noble purpose, she still stole them.
So she actually is punished by dying in childbirth,
Right. But
because
I wasn't
and
sure
it's
if
actually is Jacob's curse, because he doesn't know she hid the idols in the camel bag, okay,
right,
and refused to get up and explain to Lavan
that
the
she had
reason
her period.
that's correct. And Jacob is so angry at that moment, and of course he knows nothing about this, that he says, if that is the case, that person should die. Something like
Right.
that comes out of his mouth. And of
Mm-hmm.
course that's what happens. And what greater punishment for her than not to be able to raise her child? So
But
she
death
is
can be
punished. Yeah.
taken more than one way religiously also, and to have her buried in a different
Hmm.
place could
Yeah.
be a continuation of
Uh,
that
uh,
punishment. It's just
right.
an interpretation. It may not be yours or most people's.
Lauren, I wasn't
Yeah.
denying the interpretation. I'm not at all. I'm not trying to debate that with you. I think it's an interesting interpretation. All I was saying is that it's not one of the traditional interpretations that I have come across. And
Hmm.
that's what I feel I'm responsible for in this particular class, is to try and, lay open these traditional interpretations. So let's stop this and wish people Shabbat Shalom, and hopefully see you all Sunday.